just because his girlfriend let go of a sentence worthy of his life all his life. So in the wrath, Mark illegally invaded the computer of all-female Harvard. After downloading their private photos, Mark also created a special website for Harvard boys to score girls. Unexpectedly, the website has just been online for 2 hours at 2 a.m. Samsung's huge traffic has paralyzed the school's server system. So much so that the manager had to stay up at night to work overtime. The next day, Mark not only became a common enemy of all female students in the school, but also was disciplined by the school to stay in the school for half a year. But did not expect this incident to bring unexpected luck to Mark. Shortly thereafter, Mark not only founded the largest social networking platform in the world, but later developed into a trade empire worth more than $10,000 billion. And thanks to that, Mark has become the youngest billionaire in the world. That person is Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook founder. This film will take you to discover a solitude genius using wisdom as weapons. How did a young man lost in the teeth of affection and ambition to build the #1 social network in the world? And why did you turn into enemies with your close friend in the past? The whole story starts from the evening Mark sitting and chatting with his girlfriend in the bar. For Mark, a person with a transcendent brain, but the emotional index is almost zero. It seems that he doesn't understand what is chat. Mark kept grabbing a small gap in his girlfriend's words and deduced extreme. Moreover, he also arbitrarily convert the topic. In just 5 short minutes of the Mark conversation has turned to 4 different topics. From the number of geniuses in China is more than the US population to join any club. In the end, Mark also mocked his girlfriend naturally because he studied a bad university. Those words made Mark's girlfriend so angry that perhaps later he will have some achievements in the medical world, but the kind of person like him is worth the whole life. Then she stood up angrily. Being abandoned, Mark rushed to the dorm. Back to Mark's room, began to blog mocking his girlfriend. Not only scolded her as a bastard, but Mark also paid her to her flat breasts. After posting, Mark still felt not angry. At this time, Mark heard the idea of his roommate. Performing photos in the price of dormitories with photos together, and let them compare attractive values. This monster has inspired Mark. Mark did not want to compare the human and cattle. Comparison between people with new people. Moreover, it is best to compare between girls, but Harvard does not have a unified online photo album. So Mark has illegally invaded the network of each female dormitory area to download the entire photo of the girls. In the period of less than 4 hours, Mark had beautiful photos of most schoolgirls. Mark then created a website to compare each pair for the Harvard boys to choose the person they find the sexiest. However, Mark now needs a smart algorithm formula. At that moment, Mark's good friend Edward visited. Edward is a specialized genius of economics. Edward knows Mark broke up from the blog to comfort Mark. Mark is in need of mathematical formulas that Edward used when speculative oil speculation not long ago. This formula may be based on the evaluation of the visitors to make a dynamic assessment of the girl's attractiveness. Very quickly, then Mark wrote that formula into a program called FemAsk. After sending email to some friends, this sketchy temporary website began to spread at the speed of exponential in the Harvard student community. The nerd boys looking at the familiar faces of the girls began to be interested in assessment. Less than 2 hours of access to the website has passed 22,000. Internal server system Harvard is so overloaded to the point that the power collapse forced administrators to stay up at night to repair. Very quickly, Mark's actions were published in the school's newspaper. Mark was also because of the school management committee to consider the final discipline. Mark was convicted of infringing privacy and other crimes. The sanctioning of staying at the school to monitor for 6 months, the website was also ordered by the committee. Although Mark felt that it was wrong to arbitrarily spread the photos of girls, but Mark did not admit that he had destroyed public security. On the contrary, Mark also said that the school's gap should be rewarded. However, no matter how stubborn and intelligent Mark, there is no doubt Mark has become the common enemy of all female students in the school. Even during the lesson, Mark also received scolded messages. But Mark seemed to have fallen to the bottom of his life. 2 men nearly 2 meters tall Marco them. Initially, Mark thought they came to the girls' barricades, but did not expect them to look at Mark's ability and want to invite him to cooperate. This twins are planning a project, a social networking site for Harvard students. Harvard students can post their personal information and photos on it. Based on many years of experience in parties, they think that all girls want to date Harvard students. So they predict this site will definitely succeed, but they are currently lacking an outstanding capacity programmer. So, after knowing what Mark did, they took the initiative to come to Mark and invite him to work together. Facing this unexpected invitation, Mark did not hesitate to agree. But in fact, Mark has no intention of participating. Doing so is just a postponement, only because under the suggestion of the twins. Mark came up with a better idea. But before that idea became a reality, Mark couldn't let the twins' website debut, but couldn't reveal the ideas for them. So Mark turned to find a close friend, Edward. We can build a social networking platform. The information on it will be edited and uploaded by users, thus can avoid the problem of infringing upon privacy. If you take 1,000 USD as a startup capital, later I will share with you 3 parts, 7 parts. After listening, Edward felt that this was a project with great potential. Immediately, Edward expressed his desire to participate after receiving the first investment for the project. Mark started writing the code day and night non-stop. During that time, the twins many times asked to meet, but were used by Mark all the reasons to postpone. Just like that, within 42 brief days, the website has been completed and the facebook.com domain name is also officially registered. At the same time, Mark texted the twins, saying that their project was not the best to do not to do anymore. Later, Mark, under the suggestion of a friend who had a loving mind, added a user's personal page, a situation. And this seemingly insignificant small feature will bring a great change to Facebook after everything is ready to officially launch Facebook. To get the first seed users, Mark took advantage of Edward's relationship in the Phoenix Association, sending the path to all the warm boys she teased in Harvard. After that, dirty Facebook spread quickly as a virus. In less than 2 days, there was more 600 people registered, but the existence of dirty Facebook was quickly discovered by twins. They were born in the prestigious family and always won from childhood to large. This was the first time they were so thoroughly playing. Even though they were angry to smoke the Cameron, still did not want to solve it by quarreling. Because, according to him, it is a very losing act is not what a Harvard gentleman should do. So he only asked his father's lawyer to send Mark a legal warning letter, although Mark felt that this was not threatening enough. Anyway, he did not use any opponent's codes, and the idea was very difficult to determine whether to copy or plagiarism. But Edward, after knowing the story, was angry, not only because of fear of litigation, but also because Mark has never mentioned this to him before. As the co-founder of the Facebook, Edward expressed his willingness to join with Mark, but on the condition that he had to trust each other and not to hide anything. Mark promised to never let this situation happen again. In the next 2 weeks, the Facebook continued to explode at school. Making Facebook friends with me becomes a prevailing mouth in Harvard. Because below the website has the name of the founder, Mark and Edward immediately become celebrities on the campus. The girls who did not pay attention to them also came to get acquainted. That day, Mark and Edward had just spent a passionate night with those who admire. In the toilet, just stepped out, he saw his ex-girlfriend who had kicked him. Initially, Mark wanted to show off to her ex-lover, but did not expect the opponent to never hear about the Facebook. This made Mark's self-esteem again hurt again, and he realized his success could not be limited to Harvard. Therefore, Mark immediately decided to expand the team. Edward takes on the position of financial director, holding 30% of the original shares. Dustin, roommate, becomes a technical vice president and is divided into 5% of the shares, and recruits more programmers to write cheeks. Vow to take University Boston, where ex-girlfriends are studying, as well as Yale and Columbia by their side in a short time. And Edward proposes more college, Stanford. Anyway, the relationship between Harvard and Stanford is always very close. Any doubt 2 years later, in a rainy night California, Edward, who is wet like a mouse, will regret the proposal today because he will meet his life enemy, Sin Parker, in San Francisco. Stanford is located. Sin is a firm player, but also a famous young genius in the world. 19 years old, developed free Napster music software. Although later loses the lawsuit because of the copyright issue, he saw the big trend of the digital music that would beat the physical disc. However, the compensation losing also made him empty-handed. This makes him really need a promising investment project to thicken the money. At this moment, after waking up in the bed of a female student Stanford, he saw the Facebook page is opening on the computer next to, and immediately overlooking the great trade potential behind it. The Facebook then became a global social networking software under his management. However, before that, the Facebook was in trouble, because Mark's expansion plan quickly reached the twins. The younger brother asked to find a lawyer to ask for a ban to close the door of the Facebook. Because this site existed, for the longer the value of their Harvard connection, the more he felt. But the British still felt that this action was very rude. At this moment, the younger brother suddenly remembered Harvard's student notebook, which clearly stated that other students were stolen. And this makes them seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel, immediately deciding to denounce to the principal. So, the next day, they passed their father's relationship to have the opportunity to meet the principal. However, facing the long denunciation of the two brothers, the principal said that their ideas have not been implemented, so it is just an idea. The average Harvard are all people with many creative ideas. Instead of denouncing the stolen ideas, it is better to start doing a completely new project. When the twins angrily says their ideas are worth millions of dollars, the principal could not even help laughing, because as the former U.S. finance minister, he did not believe that the idea student was so valuable. Of course, he probably did not dare to imagine that Facebook's market value in the future up to tens of thousands of billion dollars. Finally, the lawsuit of twins failed. At this time, now Facebook has covered 29 universities, owning nearly 8,000 members with extremely high cohesion. With these advantages, Edward, as the financial director, began to think about how to make a profit. And the method of making money that he thought of was the poppy ad, but Mark was extremely opposed to this way, because he thinks the site is in the fast-growing stage. No one knows how much it will grow in the end. If now suddenly putting the popcorn ads will make it completely different. However, under the strong demand of Edward, Mark still agreed to meet advertisers in New York. But during the negotiation process, he deliberately lies, finally successfully ruining this deal. They then arranged more meetings but did not evoke Mark's interest, until through Edward's girlfriend, they knew to ask people to care about the Facebook. Actually, before meeting, Mark has admired this successful young senior. After meeting him, more and more, please be confident. Humor, obviously a dinner of 4 people, but quickly became a private stage. The most important is the idea of asking about the Facebook is almost identical to Mark. Both think that at this time is not suitable to put ads in. If not, it will be like you are playing a very happy party, suddenly notified 11 p.m. to end is really a direction. In addition, please draw Mark a bright prospect. He said that the future trade value of the Facebook will certainly not be less than $1 billion. But the last thing is completely conquered Mark was a saying before applying for leave. Remove the word "the Facebook" will be better, and this is indeed a historical change. But it was this dinner that buried the germs for the division between Mark and Edward, because Edward doesn't like to ask, not only because of his chaotic private life, but also because he used to use the optical tricks to demolish 2 internet companies. So Edward is worried that asking will be detrimental to Facebook's development. Of course, there's another useful reason. He feared that Sean's appearance would weaken his power. However, Mark clearly supported Sean's opinion, so the disagreement between him and Edward is increasingly harsh. A few months later, the number of users Facebook exceeds 150,000. Edward hoped to continue to go to New York to seek opportunities, and Mark was persuaded to decide on the summer vacation to the headquarters to California. Because both of them can convince anyone, they decided to separate each other. But before breaking up, Edward, for the benefit of the company, he was generous to give Mark $18,000 to spend on everything in California. Initially, Edward thought that in the short months of the summer vacation, no big event would occur. But it was unexpectedly during this time, the distance between him and Mark was getting farther away. In California, Mark rented a villa with a pool. A group of ordinary people, in addition to writing code, it was entertainment in the yard. That day, they played extreme to damage a faucet. The noise attracts the neighbors to knock on the door. Unexpectedly, he was Sean Parker, as usual, and took a beautiful girl. No Mark moved to California to work. Sean is very happy. When he learned that Edward did not go, his face even more clearly. In the evening, to show hospitality, Mark came to the nightclub. But the goal is not to seek joy, but to take this opportunity to fry the relationship between him and Edward. Because Sean really wants to join Facebook, but his function coincides with Edward, so he must remove Edward first. First, Sean used the example of Victoria's Secret's founder to sell the brand and finally committed suicide by jumping to the Golden Gate Bridge to implicitly remind Mark should not go into the trace of the car. After that, Sean said that he and I were the same type, who could become the characters that advised Jung-ho. And Edward is just a salary for capitalists. We are the ones who can change the situation that really creates value. Although Mark's heart still believes and rely on Edward, but when Sean promised to help him promote Facebook went to the whole Europe, Mark decided to hide Edward to pull Sean. And the result did not make him disappointed. Very quickly, Facebook became famous throughout Europe. At the same time, the twins never knew what was happening. Participating in the royal boat racing, although during the competition, they tried their best, but in the end, he only came second with a distance of half a second. At the party after the race, both were moody, but very quickly convinced themselves and tried to get up spirit. However, at this moment, they knew that Facebook had gone out of the country, America, and reach out to the world. This made the two brothers, who were more and more angry, immediately threw away the so-called gentleman style, not only, but also decided to sue Mark immediately. Facebook was very fast after that. The two sides faced each other in court, but faced the allegations of chewing the idea of the twins, Mark completely disagreed, even publicly declared, Facebook and the bullshit match idea of Juan's brothers all different, all that I and my colleagues are doing, even if the brain doesn't make it. Moreover, when asked why Mark was looking for Edward to call for investment without a wealthy twins, Mark said because Edward was the president of Harvard's Investment Association. More importantly, he is my best friend. I just trust and want to cooperate with him. However, the opponent's lawyer said the best friend he mentioned is currently demanding to compensate him for $6 million. It turned out that since the famous Facebook in Chow Europe, Mark started working continuously to program the fact that he completely forgot about Edward will come to California. And Edward can only wear heavy rain alone. Originally, this made him very unexpected when he opened the door. The first thing he saw was the person he hated the most and a group of teenagers playing in the house. Not only that, through Mark's introduction, Edward just knew that Berth not only became a member of the company, but also almost completely replaced his position. It was even more angry that while Edward Hoso searched for advertisers without results, he arranged a meeting with big investors. Edward hopes Mark can be on his side, but Mark not only denies the value and contributions of Edward to the company, but also emphasizes the importance of sin. This made Edward extremely angry and made a decision that he would regret for his life. In anger, Edward froze all the company's accounts. After that, I relentlessly returned to New York. However, when he came home, he quarreled with his girlfriend. Earlier, the relationship of both had a problem. But Edward was always in a weak position. Even though he could not stand the control of his girlfriend, he did not dare to proactively offer to break up. This time, facing the podium of girlfriend, he took the initiative to make a tie with a Kwang ancient towel bought before. But his girlfriend had never worn Kwangko towels. And the reason she was awake this time was because of Edward's relationship, Facebook displays single. However, as the co-founder, Edward did not know how to edit that status. At this moment, Edward's phone suddenly shouted. His girlfriend thought was his lover in California, but it turned out to be Mark. Edward was inherently afraid of Mark's phone, but at this time he saw the savior rushing into the toilet to answer the phone. It turned out that Mark discovered that bank cards were frozen. Mark angrily scolded Edward should not do so. Even criticizing this revenge on Edward is very childish, because no matter how big the internal conflict, should not harm the company. Once the string is broken, the server will stop working. The server stopped working even a day can activate the domino effect to destroy Facebook, so it is based on this user relationship. Initially, Edward just wanted to use this method to prove his importance in the company, now realizing the seriousness of the problem, but fortunately detected in time, so it did not cause serious consequences. Mark also agreed to ignore everything. Mark then declared an extremely good news. The big investor met before, which attaches great importance to Facebook's development, to invest in $500,000 in a decent office. But because the newly joined the company had to restructure, Mark told Edward to quickly fly to Los Angeles to sign some extremely important documents. The sudden surprise made Edward extremely excited, and this seems to give him more confidence and courage to frankly say goodbye to his girlfriend. Edward then took the nearest flight night to the new office in San Francisco. At this time, 2 lawyers were waiting. They gave Edward 4 agreements, but Edward did not look carefully but only asked about the share rate. When knowing the ratio of Mark's shares is 51%, his 34%, and Sin's only accounted for only 6.47%. Edward is very satisfied with this division. So, as an excellent student of the Harvard Department of Economics, Edward signed the agreements without even reading the content. No doubt, Mark's best friend, Mark Travel, took this opportunity to trap him. A few months later, the number of users Facebook is about to reach 1 million. Mark plans to organize a celebration party in the company, also especially notify Edward must participate. That day, Edward was not only on time, but also specially dressed. But unexpectedly, waiting for him was an ambush. The part of Mark designed, the ownership ratio of all others did not change. Only Edward's shares were diluted from 34% to 0.03%. Not only that, Edward was eliminated from Facebook as the co-founder, nor his name. Because in the 4th agreement, Edward voluntarily signed the abandonment of the voting rights of the shareholders to authorize Mark to handle when absent. At this time, Edward finally realized that he was betrayed by his best friend. Tricot friends who are close as brothers have now become an enemy without heaven. Edward really wanted to know when Mark had the intention to remove him from the company. When Mark did not answer this question, Edward initially guessed that at the time of freezing his account. But he thought that it was probably earlier until Facebook was born, because Edward had overcome many challenges to join Phoenix Club, the club that Mark really wanted to join, but in the end was not eligible, and this made Mark pretty jealous. But at that time, Mark really needs the relationship of Phoenix Club to promote Facebook. So, after taking advantage of Edward, Mark was forced to put his name in the co-founder. But after meeting Sin and the disagreement between the two growing, Mark was suddenly unjustified by the school newspaper as one of the Facebook co-founder. This is certainly very detrimental to Facebook's development. Mark then used this to counter Edward's allegations, criticize him to harm the image and interests of the company. However, the truth is that it is just a mistake. When Edward just joined the Phoenix Club as part of the ritual of joining, he had to bring a chicken with him. As a result, that day the school's cafeteria was served with chicken, and he was forced to feed chickens, leading to being sued by the person who forced chickens to eat fellow meat. Although this finally resolved, Mark was straightforwardly said, "No stomach." But now Edward realized that he was probably trapped by Mark. But all of this has no evidence. Moreover, Edward has now been eliminated from the game to calculate these things in vain, in the trap that has been ready by the capitalists. Some people lose everything, some have successfully rise. However, even though he has achieved what he wants, he doesn't seem to be completely satisfied. So he publicly humiliated the defeated. Take out a $19,000 consideration Edward initially invested and mocked him, unfortunately, could not withdraw money because the account was frozen. Although Mark did not speak up in this conflict, after Edward left, he suddenly criticized, so he should not do so. And this is the first time the two have been controversial. At this moment, the number of users Facebook officially passes 1 million, now less than 1 year since it debuted. Everyone in the company cheered, and Mark looked a bit lonely. Obviously, this is the glorious moment he used to dream, but now not find someone to share the joy after the official celebration. Please organize a second party, but Mark did not come, but stayed in the company alone. But fortunately, he did not participate. Because he was very fast after that, he knew the word asking for them to use banned substances at the party. And there are many young children involved, so when the police were discovered, they were taken to the station. Suspecting this is Edward's revenge. If it was not so coincidentally, I met the police. But Mark was asserted that it was absolutely impossible. Then he said that now is not the time to take care of this. Anyway, senior leaders are involved in banned substances with young children will surely spread very quickly online. The negative impact on the company is unpredictable. He needed to quickly think of a solution, but he had not yet made the solution himself. Mark himself has repeatedly caught in the 2 lawsuits of twins and Edward. although he and the lawyer had talked to the opponent before. Even the three parties also confront each other, but the whole day still has no results. Mark's lawyer told him that without reconciliation, the next step can only be taken to court, and based on many Mark's evidence and actions, the jury is most likely not sympathetic to Mark. This means that Mark is very likely to lose. Therefore, compensation is the most wise choice now. Anyway, Mark is now a billionaire trillion. The amount of compensation for him is like a grain of sand. Mark thought for a while and then decided to accept this outcome. Then told the lawyer, "I was not a bad person." And the lawyer answered him in a hidden way. He is really not a bastard, but he is trying to become a bad person. Mark finally compensated the twins of $65 million. And Edward's name as one of the founders was rewritten in a publisher after the lawyer left. Mark searched for ex-girlfriend on Facebook, then send an invitation to make friends, and sit in front of the computer continuously refresh the page to see if she accepts the invitation. One of the initial motivations for Mark to create Facebook is to prove her ability to her ex-girlfriend. But now he has become one of the leading young billionaires in the world. Not receiving a look back from the first lover also lost the only sincere friend. Social Network is a biography film by David Fincher, directed. Jesse Eisenbach and Andrew Garfield starred in 2010. But it is not a mainstream biography, but adapted from a novel. Most of the episodes in the movie are fictional. Director David Fincher also acknowledged this as a biography film mixed with fiction and reality. Moreover, Hollywood has an unwritten rule. If the main character of a biography film is still alive, at least giving the script to that person to see. But this movie has not been able to have Duquesne-Boss's consent. After the movie released, Duquesne-Boss expressed that the episodes in the film were really different from the reality. No one was so stupid to write the formula on the glass door. However, Duquesne-Boss is not therefore criticizing the film producer. Perhaps because this movie is not really a personal biography, but rather a story that includes friendship, the betrayal of jealousy, and in accordance with the issues of the era. Mark is a genius with a flaw. Although he has an extremely high intelligence index, he is selfishness, and never thinks of other people's feelings. The ex-girlfriend also criticized him for this. But Mark never found the cause from himself, but he felt the opposite, despised himself. Even using poisonous words on the internet to attack her, a little bit of resentment in her heart. Edward was the only friend who truly cared about Mark, knowing that he was also the first to run to comfort. But Mark knows that Edward, joining Phoenix Club, immediately showed the inadequacy and jealousy, even arising and performing revenge. But it was also because of his high self-esteem and aggression that made Mark silently vowed that he had to build a career to kick everyone down at his feet. And this as the new social network empire Facebook today. But when Mark really achieved the desired position, in his heart there is no joy like imagination, nor has the feeling of gloating when leaving people of the same age. On the contrary, it feels more empty and lonely. That is because from the beginning, Mark was wrong about the reason for her not to be loved and treated well. He desires to integrate with the collective, desire to be recognized, but because of low self-esteem, always lower and hurt others, thinking that doing so will surprise others, but unexpectedly push people away. But Mark is really not a bad person, but like a poor person who is unable to love. Finally, despite owning a $1 trillion fortune, he still became a lonely person who did not have true happiness. Another reason why Mark initially founded Facebook to want to pull people closer together. In fact, people can also pass network to make friends with anyone in the world. However, as the name of the virtual and real world is increasingly erased, the loneliness of the hollow resistance began to spread rapidly. One end of the network is the dark sky. The happier online, the more lonely after disconnection, and this gradually becomes the true image of each person. But in addition to seriously affecting the actual relationships, the people exaggerate the bad aspects of human nature, like many cruel and insults. Everyone will not arbitrarily uttered in real life, no matter how low emotional index or dignity. It will also be due to the consequences of the consequences that consider carefully, but the people in the virtual world are not abstained from cheap. They wrote the harshest words in the dark room, like murderers wearing brutal masks without eyes. But the development of the times is like that. No one can change, no one can turn around, only in this swirling flow forward. Try to preserve the initial mind to persevere with good things. The value of a movie lies in the reputation of the value of a movie comment, lies in the feeling. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.